all started on a quiet Sunday morning when I received the phone call that shattered my world. The voice on the other end belonged to a police officer, calm but heavy with words I wasn't prepared to hear. My son, Michael, had been involved in a terrible accident. His car had skidded off the wet highway late at night, and by the time help arrived, it was already too late. I remember the room spinning, my knees giving way as the officer explained what had happened. My son, the boy I raised, the man I was so proud of, was gone. Michael wasn't just my only child, he was my entire reason for waking up each day. He had built a life many would envy, brilliant, ambitious, and loved by those who worked for him. He was the head of a multi-million-dollar tech company, a man with vision and kindness. Someone who often spoke about using his wealth to make a difference in the world. I had always believed his story was just beginning, that he had decades ahead to leave his mark. That belief was ripped away in an instant, leaving only silence and unanswered questions. The days after his death felt unreal, like moving through fog. People came with flowers, condolences, and whispered stories about how sudden it all was, but nothing pierced the numbness inside me. I couldn't stop replaying the last conversation I had with him. He had promised to visit me that weekend, to cook my favorite dinner, just as he did when he wanted to make me laugh. Now those words echoed endlessly in my mind, cruel reminders of a moment I would never get back. But while I was drowning in grief, others seemed oddly composed. His wife, Vanessa, stood at the center of everything, calm, polished, and unnervingly detached. At the funeral arrangements, I noticed her absence of tears, her distant stares, her way of speaking as though Michael's death was just an inconvenience to be managed. Something inside me twisted whenever I looked at her. Why wasn't she devastated? Why did her lips curl almost into a smile when people spoke of his fortune? As the funeral day approached, rumors began to surface. Rumors that whispered not about Michael's death, but about the immense wealth he left behind. People said the inheritance could change the lives of anyone who received it, that it wasn't just money but power, influence, and control, and though I was still broken by grief, I couldn't ignore what I saw in Vanessa's eyes whenever Michael's company or his millions were mentioned. A glimmer of greed, sharp and undeniable. The funeral was held in a grand hall, filled with family, colleagues, and friends who had come to pay their respects. The atmosphere was heavy, the air thick with sorrow. People cried openly, clutching tissues, their voices breaking as they spoke of Michael's kindness and brilliance. Yet among the grieving faces, one stood apart. Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, the woman who had shared a home and a life with my son, sat in the front row, her expression cold and unreadable. Not a single tear fell from her eyes. It was as though she had come to witness a performance, rather than mourn a husband. She wore a sleek black dress, perfectly tailored, her hair immaculate, her posture commanding. When people approached her with condolences, she nodded politely, almost mechanically, as if brushing away their emotions. I watched her closely, searching for even a flicker of grief, but all I found was detachment. Instead of sorrow, there was something else in her demeanor, something sharp, almost smug, while others sobbed. She sat with her chin slightly raised, as though she had already moved on from the man lying in the coffin. The moment that unsettled me most came when she caught me watching her. Our eyes locked, and for a fraction of a second, Her lips curved into the faintest smile. It wasn't warm. It wasn't kind. It was a smile that chilled me to the bone, as though she knew something I didn't. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, replaced by her stoic mask. My heart raced. Why would she smile on a day like this? What kind of wife could sit in front of her husband's casket and allow herself even a trace of satisfaction? Later, as guests mingled quietly, I overheard fragments of conversation near Vanessa. She leaned close to a friend, whispering words I couldn't fully catch, but the tone was unmistakable, light, casual, almost playful. Her friend's laughter followed, quickly stifled when they noticed others watching. My stomach turned. Here I was, clutching the last photograph of my son with trembling hands, while his widow whispered and smirked like she was at a cocktail party. By the end of the ceremony, I couldn't shake the feeling that Vanessa wasn't mourning at all. If anything, she seemed relieved. I remembered how she glanced at Michael's casket one final time before leaving. She didn't touch it, didn't whisper goodbye, didn't linger. Instead, she walked away briskly, her heels clicking against the floor, her head held high. To me, it felt less like a widow leaving her husband's funeral and more like a woman stepping into a new role. One she had been anticipating all along. Several weeks after the funeral, I found myself walking into the oak, paneled office of Michael's attorney. The air smelled faintly of leather and old books, the kind of place where secrets seemed to cling to the walls. Family members and close associates had been summoned for the reading of the will, and though I dreaded the day, I knew it would come. Sitting at the center of the long mahogany table was Vanessa, dressed sharply in a designer suit, her diamond necklace catching the light. She leaned back casually in her chair, crossing her legs with the poise of someone who already knew victory was hers. Her confidence was suffocating. She greeted a few relatives with icy politeness, but avoided my gaze entirely. When the lawyer entered with a sealed envelope in his hand, Vanessa gave a faint smirk, whispering something under her breath that made her friend beside her chuckle softly. I caught just enough to hear the words. "This is just a formality." My stomach tightened. She wasn't nervous, not even curious. She was certain of her position, certain that everything Michael had built would fall neatly into her lap. Around the table, the atmosphere was tense. Some relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others avoided looking at Vanessa altogether. I noticed the way she tapped her manicured nails against the table, a rhythm that echoed like a countdown. It wasn't grief that filled her eyes. It was hunger, a burning expectation. For her, this wasn't about Michael's memory, it was about power, wealth, and control. And the cruel part was that nobody dared challenge her. Everyone seemed to believe the same thing, that she was the sole heir to Michael's $42 million fortune. The lawyer cleared his throat, his face pale, as though he carried a burden heavier than paper. "Thank you all for being here," he began, adjusting his glasses nervously. Vanessa raised an eyebrow, tilting her head with impatience. "Let's not drag this out," she muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Her arrogance filled the room, silencing the whispers and leaving only the sound of the envelope being torn open. My heart pounded in my chest. Whatever lay inside those folded pages would decide the future, not just hers, but mine as well. The air grew thick as the lawyer unfolded the will, his hands trembling slightly. I noticed the flicker of uncertainty cross his face, a hesitation that lasted only a moment, but was impossible to miss. Vanessa laughed softly, rolling her eyes as if the drama was unnecessary. "Oh, come on," she scoffed. "We all know how this ends." Her voice dripped with disdain, dismissing everyone else in the room as irrelevant. But I leaned forward, my instincts screaming that she was wrong. Something about the lawyer's expression told me this wasn't going to be the simple coronation Vanessa expected. The lawyer's voice wavered as he began to read, his eyes darting nervously across the words on the page. He paused longer than he should have after the first sentence, his lips tightening as though something about the will unsettled him. People shifted in their chairs, exchanging uneasy glances. Vanessa, however, only leaned back further, a smug smile tugging at her lips. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her tone dripping with mock concern. The lawyer cleared his throat, avoiding her gaze, and muttered, "This will is unusual." His hesitation set every nerve in my body on edge. Vanessa laughed under her breath, a sound so sharp and hollow it sliced through the tense silence. "Unusual," she repeated, tilting her head like she was humoring a child. "Michael adored me. Everyone here knows that. Let's not make this dramatic." She waved her hand dismissively, as if urging him to skip to the part where she inherited everything. But the lawyer's hands trembled slightly as he held the paper, and his knuckles whitened from the grip. He seemed reluctant to go on, as if what he was about to say might ignite something none of us were prepared for. The air in the room thickened. I could hear the faint ticking of the antique clock on the wall, each second stretching longer than the last. The lawyer adjusted his glasses again, stalling, his breath shallow. A murmur rippled through the table as relatives whispered, wondering what could possibly cause such unease. Vanessa, clearly irritated, leaned forward now, her eyes narrowing. "Just get on with it," she snapped, her voice sharp and commanding. Her impatience only deepened the suspense, as though even she sensed a shadow in the words waiting to be spoken. At that moment, I realized the lawyer wasn't just nervous, he was conflicted. His eyes briefly flicked toward me, almost apologetically, before returning to the will. My heart pounded as I gripped the edge of the table, unsure what to expect. I could feel something building, like the pause before a storm. The silence was unbearable, stretching out until it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The lawyer finally opened his mouth, but again he hesitated, staring at the ink as if it might change beneath his eyes. Vanessa let out a sharp laugh, shaking her head. "For God's sake, it's a will, not a murder confession," she sneered. But there was a flicker of something in her voice. Something defensive, almost desperate. For the first time, I saw her confidence falter, just slightly, as if deep down she feared Michael might not have left everything to her after all. And when the lawyer finally steadied his voice, the words that followed would strike the first crack in the facade she had so carefully built. The lawyer's voice finally steadied as he read the next line, though every word seemed to weigh heavily on his tongue. "To my beloved wife, Vanessa." He paused, and for the briefest moment, I saw relief wash across her face. She straightened in her chair, her lips curling into that smug smile once more. Her eyes flicked across the room triumphantly, daring anyone to challenge her place as Michael's rightful heir. The lawyer inhaled sharply, and then delivered the words that shattered her composure. "I leave $1. Gasps erupted from the table. A murmur of disbelief spread among the relatives, their voices overlapping in shock. I turned toward Vanessa, just in time to see the color drain from her face. Her confident grin dissolved into something raw and jagged, rage. She slammed her palm onto the table, so hard the sound echoed through the office. "What?" she shouted, her voice cracking with disbelief. "This must be a mistake." "Read it again!" Her words trembled, not with grief, but with fury at having been denied the fortune she had already claimed in her mind. The lawyer remained composed, though his voice trembled slightly as he repeated the clause, word for word. There was no error, no ambiguity. Michael had been deliberate in his choice, his intentions written clearly in ink. Vanessa's chest rose and fell sharply as her eyes darted around the room, searching for support, for anyone who might question the authenticity of the will. But all she found were stunned faces and hushed whispers. For the first time since Michael's death, she looked powerless, and the sight of it unsettled me, as much as it satisfied me. Unbelievable. She spat, pushing back her chair with a screech. He wouldn't do this to me. He couldn't. Her voice was sharp, but there was something brittle underneath. Something that betrayed the panic gnawing at her. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, as though holding on to her last shred of control. Every movement of hers radiated desperation, her carefully constructed poise unraveling in front of everyone. Yet still, the lawyer continued calmly, turning to the next section of the will. The room grew eerily quiet, the tension so heavy it pressed down on all of us. Vanessa stood rigid, her breathing shallow, her eyes burning with a mix of fury and fear. She was no longer the cold, composed widow from the funeral. She was something else entirely. Cornered, stripped of her certainty. Trembling at the thought of what Michael had discovered before his death. And as the lawyer prepared to read the next clause, everyone leaned forward, bracing themselves for the revelation that was about to tear the room apart. The lawyer's voice deepened as he continued, his tone careful, deliberate, as though he knew every word would cut like a blade. "The remainder of my 42 million fortune." He paused again, and the silence in the room was suffocating. Vanessa's chest heaved, her eyes wide, locked on him with a venomous glare. Her fingers dug into the polished wood of the table, as though she could claw her way back into control. Everyone leaned forward, desperate for the next words. Finally, the lawyer exhaled and said, "Shall be transferred to another beneficiary, named here." The murmurs began immediately. "Another beneficiary," someone whispered. Vanessa shook her head violently, her earrings catching the light. No, this is wrong. He wouldn't do this to me," she muttered, her voice trembling. But the lawyer pressed on, his eyes fixed on the paper in front of him. Before his death, Michael discovered certain truths that changed his decision regarding this inheritance. The word truths hung in the air like a dark cloud. My breath caught in my throat. What truths? And why had my son kept them hidden until now? The lawyer cleared his throat and unfolded the next page. "It has come to my attention," he read, "that my wife, Vanessa, engaged in a prolonged extramarital affair." Gasps tore through the room, sharp and unrestrained. Vanessa's face twisted, her mask of elegance completely shattered. She opened her mouth to protest, but her words tangled into a furious growl. "Lies!" she snapped. "All of it lies!" But her voice quivered. and her hands shook as she tried to control the storm breaking around her. My stomach churned as I sat frozen in my chair, the weight of the revelation crashing over me. Suddenly, fragments of memory began to piece themselves together. Late night phone calls, unexplained absences, and Michael's distant tone when we last spoke about his marriage. Had he known all along? Was this why he looked so tired the last time I saw him? Vanessa's affair was no longer a rumor. It was carved into Michael's final words, undeniable and devastating. And it explained everything. Why she hadn't shed a tear, why her smile at the funeral had seemed so haunting. But the lawyer wasn't finished. His eyes lifted briefly, scanning the room, before lowering again to the paper. His voice steadied as he continued, "And because of this betrayal, the rightful heir to my estate shall be." He stopped suddenly, as though weighing the gravity of what came next. Every ear strained toward him, every breath in the room held. Vanessa's lips trembled as she whispered through clenched teeth, "Don't you dare." But the lawyer ignored her, pressing on to reveal the name Michael had chosen. The lawyer's voice finally broke through the suffocating silence. "The rightful heir to my estate shall be my child, whether born before or after my passing." The words struck the room like a thunderclap. A collective gasp filled the air, and all eyes shifted instantly to Vanessa. Her face drained of color, her lips parting in disbelief. She shook her head violently, her voice rising into a scream. "No, he didn't know. He couldn't have known." Her words were wild, panicked, the sound of a woman watching her empire crumble into dust. The lawyer pressed on, his tone steady but heavy. "If no child is confirmed, then the estate shall be transferred to my mother, Evelyn." My heart lurched. Me! My name was there? Inked into Michael's final words, a safety net he had built in case of betrayal. My hands trembled in my lap as Vanessa spun toward me, her eyes blazing with a hatred so fierce it nearly froze me in place. She opened her mouth to curse. But the lawyer continued before she could speak, reaching for another envelope. "This," he said, sliding the envelope across the polished table toward me, "was left with strict instructions to be given only at the reading of the will." My fingers shook as I took it, my pulse thundering in my ears. The paper felt heavier than it should have, as though it carried not just words, but truth. Slowly, I tore it open, and inside, tucked between folded sheets, was a photograph. My breath caught. It wasn't just any photograph. It was a grainy black and white sonogram. A child. An unborn life. Proof that Michael had known Vanessa was pregnant before his death. The room erupted into chaos. Gasps, whispers, frantic voices overlapped until it was impossible to make sense of them. Vanessa's chair screeched against the floor as she shot to her feet, her hands trembling. "That's not his child!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. "It isn't his! He can't prove, he can't." Her words broke into sobs, though they carried no grief, only fear. She clutched the edge of the table like a drowning woman clinging to driftwood, her perfectly composed mask completely destroyed. I stared at the sonogram, my throat tightening. My son had known. He had left this behind not just as evidence, but as a warning. The lawyer's voice cut through the chaos once more. "Paternity of the unborn child shall determine the true heir." The room went silent again, the weight of his words pressing down like a stone. My eyes lifted slowly to Vanessa's face, pale and frantic, her lips quivering as though she already knew the truth. The child she carried might not belong to Michael at all. The lawyer's words echoed in the stillness of the room. Paternity of the unborn child shall determine the true heir. No one moved. No one breathed. The fortune, the legacy, everything Michael left behind now rested on a truth hidden deep within Vanessa's womb. Her hands trembled as she clutched her stomach, her eyes darting wildly, searching for a way out. For the first time, she wasn't in control. She was cornered, exposed, and powerless. I sat frozen, the sonogram still in my hands, my son's silent message burning into my heart. The inheritance no longer mattered. What haunted me most was the question Michael had left behind, a question that no lawyer, no document, and no fortune could ever erase. Was the child she carried truly his, or the living proof of her betrayal? And as Vanessa's strangled sobs filled the room, one thing became certain. No matter the answer, the shadow of this secret would haunt us all forever.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.